During this presentation, I'm going to explain the requirements of the Business Project Proposal, the Business Operations Brief, and the Business Project for both Team Member and Hospitality Supervisor apprenticeship standards. This is part of the endpoint assessment process. The requirements of Gateway for Team Member and Hospitality Supervisor are the Business Project Proposal and the Business Operations Brief, as well as the usual Gateway Declaration, 2-week work schedule and evidence of maths and English. The Business Project Proposal recording form can be found within the Recording Forms document under each of the Apprenticeship Standard document tabs on the City & Guilds website. These forms are Word versions, so can be typed into. We advise you use these forms rather than create your own, as they allow the apprentice to format using the required headings. The Business Project Proposal will be reviewed by the independent endpoint assessor, and a decision given to the apprentice during the initial meeting as to whether it is fit for purpose, and so meaning the apprentice can go away and produce their business project. The completion of the business project must not take place before the business project proposal has been agreed at the initial meeting by the independent endpoint assessor. For both Team Member and Hospitality Supervisor, the proposal only needs to be 200 to 300 words. The proposal for the business project must be the apprentice's own work and have been discussed with the employer. It must also be relevant to the employer's business and focus on making an improvement. More information on the Business Operations Brief can be found in the February 2019 update by following the link shown on the slide. The EPA recording forms shown there to the left have also been updated, so you can include the brief within the same document as the business project proposal. The Business Operations Brief needs to be an overview of the apprentice's job role, how that role fits into the organisation, and how the organisation fits into the wider hospitality industry. The brief also needs to include information on the business culture and what the business or organisational brand standard is. It needs to be no more than one A4 page. It is required for Team Member and Hospitality Supervisor and will be discussed at the initial meeting, so the independent endpoint assessor has an understanding of the business the apprentice works in and their role within that business. Creating the Business Operations Brief will also support the apprentice with thinking about the wider hospitality industry, which is a requirement within the business project and the professional discussion. Once the independent endpoint assessor has agreed the business project proposal at the initial meeting, the apprentice can complete the actual business project. It is recommended that the apprentice uses the City & Guilds recording forms. They can be directly typed into and have the content within them so that the apprentice can cover the requirements and get the layout correct. PowerPoint presentations are requested not to be used, as this appears to be limiting the content of the actual business project. The apprentice will also need to be given the pass and distinction criteria so they know exactly what they are trying to cover. These criteria, though, should not be used as bullet points or questions to be answered, but are the content that needs to be met within the business project. The business project must relate to the business the apprentice works in and can be theoretical or apply to general practice. For Team Member and Hospitality Supervisor, it is not necessary to carry out the actual business idea, so long as the apprentice considers the impacts and how success will be measured and what period it would be trialled for. Within the business project, it is important that for both Team Member and Hospitality Supervisor, the apprentice includes an introduction to the business, their role, and how the business fits into the wider hospitality business. The inclusion of references is also a requirement. The actual areas to be covered are in italics listed in the first 2 bullet points on the slide. The Recording Forms documents has a section for each of these. Please also note the word count for both standards in the last 2 bullet points on the slide. It is important to ensure that the employer is engaged with the project and can support the apprentice in research and development. A number of business projects have now been assessed by the independent endpoint assessors, and some examples of those types of projects are on controlling and minimising waste, introducing recycling systems, using paper straws, promoting new menu items, introducing new menus, for example children's menus, or developing a standardised induction process, introducing theme nights and events, and developing processes to increase food hygiene rating. To support your apprentice with passing the business project, ensure you issue the pass and distinction criteria and are able to clearly explain what the apprentice has to include content-wise in order to cover at least the pass criteria. Developing the apprentice's thoughts within the business operations brief will help the apprentice to cover the required content on the hospitality industry. We do advise using our templates as these give a very structured layout and ensure that aims and objectives and research is documented. The apprentice does need to complete all sections of the templates. If they don't want to use our templates, please at least advise they use the headings we have included within the templates and discourage them from presenting anything on PowerPoint slides, as examples of this have highlighted to the endpoint assessors that content that doesn't seem to be sufficient and has meant apprentices have failed. Remember that the business project should not be started until confirmation of acceptance of the proposal is received from the independent endpoint assessor at the initial meeting. Failure to adhere to this by starting the business project before endpoint assessment could result in an automatic fail. Whilst the project can actually take place in practice, timescales are not favourable to achieving this, so a project in theory is perfectly acceptable. The business project needs to be initially uploaded to the endpoint assessment portal prior to the practical observation taking place, and any resubmissions would need to occur and a pass be confirmed prior to the professional discussion taking place. The business project forms part of the professional discussion, so it is imperative that it is the apprentice's own work and they can explain their reasons for selection and discuss their findings. Having a copy of the business project during their professional discussion would support with this. Don't forget, most professional discussions take place remotely via video webinar, with the independent endpoint assessor not in the room with the employer and the apprentice. For team member, the discussion on the business project lasts 10 minutes and then the rest of the planned professional discussion takes place. For Hospitality Supervisor, the apprentice needs to present their findings to the employer and the time allocated for this is 30 minutes. The apprentice is allowed to, and it would be useful to actually produce a presentation which the EPA team can upload to the video webinar before the professional discussion takes place. It may also be helpful for the apprentice to actually present this to the employer in the room at the time, to make the presentation part of the professional discussion seem more realistic both for the apprentice and for the independent endpoint assessor, to try and ensure more criteria are met. Once the presentation part has been completed of the professional discussion, a short break could take place and then the rest of the planned professional discussion will occur. I hope you found this presentation useful. If you do have any further queries about the business project proposal, the business operations brief, or the actual business project, or any other part of the endpoint assessment process for the Hospitality Apprenticeship Standards, do contact me. Thanks for listening.